Jerry is a native Texan who knows a thing or two about leadership, and having pulled himself up by his own bootstraps, as they say in Texas. And again, that's going to be an amazing part of the story that you'll hear. Jerry's been wildly successful. Because of that success, today he could be anywhere in the world. And yesterday he was in Cabo San Lucas sitting on the back of a boat, and he realized he had to put on long pants to come to St. Louis. But he could be anywhere in the world doing anything he wants to do. Anything. But because Jerry realizes that, as we said last night, much of who he is today and what he has is a direct result of the experience he has as a collegiate member of Sigma Nu, and the credit he gives us for that. He's here today because of his love for our mission to build ethical leaders. And he's going to share his thoughts on leadership with you. So please join me in a warm welcome for Brother Jerry Fields.
Well, good afternoon, brothers. You know, flying up here from Cabo last night on the airplane, I kind of thought, how would I address you when I came here today? Maybe boys, maybe men, maybe gentlemen. Well, frankly speaking, I don't know any of you well enough to know whether you're a boy, or a man, or a gentleman, but I hope that before you leave St. Louis, those of you who are boys will come in. Those of you who are men will become gentlemen. Now, let me start this out as it will be a story. But I want to say two things that I want you to listen to. What would you do with your life if you know you would not fail? Meaning that anything you wanted to do, a rock star, the President of the United States, go to the moon, you would not fail. Be a billionaire, you would not fail. But what would you do with your life if you could not fail? Meaning that if you failed, you would affect other people's lives. Maybe your children's, maybe your wife's, maybe a universe. Meaning that if you could not fail and you took on an assignment, that assignment is something that you would have to live with. Now, let me tell you a little bit about that. There's only two letters difference, a W and a C. But as I go through this story, I hope that you will see the differences between a W and a C. I grew up in West Texas, and by that I mean West Texas. I was the son with a sister and a brother of what they called oil field trash. My father was a roughneck working on a drilling rig. Every so often, the rig would move and we would move. From the time I started first grade in Rankin, Texas in 1951 until I graduated from Midland High School in 1963, I went to 32 different schools. Sometimes my parents would check me in on Monday and check me out on Friday. As we moved around the country, we also lived in New York, New Jersey, Iowa, West Virginia. It was never easy to be chosen. As a matter of fact, you go into gym class, you have a captain for one side, a captain for another. I was never chosen. I simply walked to the other side for the last person that was standing there. Now, as I moved through my life, I've lived in houses that had dirt floors. I lived in a house that had no bathroom, no running water. I lived in a house without electricity. So I know what it is to be poor. I've been there, I've done that, and I understand every aspect of not having any money. Now, when I graduated from Midland High School in 1963, my parents' ambition for me was to become a driller on a drilling rig. I was the first person that ever made a decision to go to college. Now, not having any money, I had one way, and one way only, to get an education. And that was to get a job. So on graduation day in May of 1963, when everybody else left to go to the graduation party, I got in the car and drove 80 miles out to a drilling rig, arrived there at 11 o'clock at night, and worked till 7 o'clock the next morning. I did all that all during the summer, sometimes working 2 shifts, 16 hours a day, 7 days a week, driving back home, getting maybe 5, 6 hours of sleep before I returned back to the oil field. But by September, I went off to college. At the time, it was called Southwest Texas State Teachers College, now Texas State University. My first year there, I felt as though I'd felt my whole life, that I was an unwanted individual, that no one wanted to be my friend, no one would choose me. So as a freshman, I went through that year making an adjustment to my life. End of that year, I went back and worked in the oil fields to again make enough money to return to school. When I returned to school that September, a group of guys approached me and said, "You are not in a fraternity?" I said, "No, I'm not in a fraternity." He said, "Well, would you be interested in a fraternity?" I said, "Well, let me tell you one thing, gentlemen. I've been hazed and bullied all my life. And I'm not going to join a group of people that are going to haze or bully me, and I understand that's what fraternity life is." Well, this group at the time was a local fraternity that made application to join the national organization of Sigma Nu. And they said, "Sigma Nu doesn't believe in hazing. You will not be hazed." Well, I did go through Rush. I met a lot of people, and I accepted the bid from Sigma Nu. The following year, I was elected junior class president of Texas State University. In April of 1966, the colony of Sigma Nu became a Sigma Nu Etowah chapter. My initiate number is number 4. I was the first elected commander of Etowah chapter of Sigma Nu in May of 1966. At the end of that semester, I returned to Midland to work in the oil fields because I had to make enough money to return to school. 5 days in, I broke my back. As I was laying in the hospital in Midland, Texas, my mom and dad were standing out talking to the doctor. The doctor says, "Mr. and Mrs. Fields, I don't think your son will ever walk again." That's pretty hard to take when you're a 20-year-old man. Maybe I was a boy. But I can tell you, I said to myself right then, how will I live my life if I know I cannot fail it? 2 months later, I exited the hospital in a back brace that went from my buttocks up to here, with instructions only to remove it when I took a bath. That September, I returned back to Texas State University as commander. It was one of the proudest moments in my whole life. Now, unfortunately, being in the back brace, by the end of that semester in January, the doctors had convinced me to move to Houston, Texas to have back surgery. I dropped out of school lacking 17 hours. I got to Houston. The doctor told me what he wanted to do, and I had to ask myself, would he fail or could he fail? There's no guarantees, so I elected not to have the surgery. After a couple of months, I finished my rehabilitation, and I got a job. In August of 1967, I married my wife under one promise, that I would finish my education. No one in her family was uneducated, she told me. I said, "Fine, I promise you I will." I said, "But please give me 1 semester because we live in Houston. I'll have to go to the University of Houston. At that time, you had to get your last 30 hours from the school you graduated from." She said, "Fine." Now, I want to back up for just a moment. There's a guy by the name of Richard Fletcher that was then the executive director of Sigma Nu. He told me a story. And this is a story that I'm going to insert right here in my story. that there was a young collegiate graduate during the Vietnam War. He went to Vietnam, and his brigade was told, "We have an assignment. This assignment is for your platoon to hold this position. You hold this position until reinforcements arrive." This individual had no way of knowing, would he or could he? But the consequences of if he couldn't was hundreds of lives would be at stake. And the Vietnamese army would overrun the position and kill many, many people. Well, when the reinforcements did arrive, they found this young man face down, dead. As they turned him over, in his hand was a little white plastic card. And on that white plastic card was his initiation number, his chapter, and the creed of Sigma Nu. That young man died with his promise that he would do what he could do and live his life as though he could do something. Did he fail? No. He held his position, but he lost his life. Now we'll go back to my story. I was able to move from Houston, Texas to San Antonio in January of the next year after marrying my wife. That enabled me to commute 50 miles from San Antonio, Texas to San Marcos. Tuesdays, Thursdays, Saturdays, 7 a.m. class. During the summer, every day of the week, 7 a.m. class, until I graduated in January of 1969. I got the last 17 hours that I actually swore to my wife that I would do. Could I? Would I? I knew I wouldn't fail. Now I moved back to Houston and take a job with the company. I worked for that company for 17 years. I had a good job. I enjoyed what I did. But there was a company by the name of Colbert, Kravis, and Roberts off Wall Street. They bought the company, took it public, became very dissatisfied, and started my own business on the 25th day of January 1985. I started moving forward with my life, building the company, hiring people, taking on responsibility for those employees and other people's families, for being responsible to vendors, trucking companies, all the people that supported my organization. I became a member of the Board of Trustees of the Houston Museum of Natural Science, the fourth largest visited museum in the United States of America. I was elected chairman of that board in 2000. I served on that board proudly. On January the 24th, 2001, I was in my home in Wimberley, Texas, and I called my office, and my assistant said to me, "You've got a very disturbing message on your desk." My personality dictates, well, if it's so damn disturbing, why don't you read it to me? Well, the message went like this: "I have fallen and cannot get up. Therefore, I resign my position as CFO of your company." And he signed his name, and my American Express card, corporate card, was laying there, along with the keys to the car and the keys to the office. I immediately thought, because I'd known this individual for a good number of years, trusted him, that maybe his life had turned sour, and the first thing that came to my mind is maybe he committed suicide. So I immediately had my assistant call all the surrounding hotels and motels to see if he had checked in. There was no one listed there by his name. I called his wife, and I said, "Susie, I need to speak with Craig." "Jerry, he's at the office." I said, "No, he's not at the office." 3 days later, he calls his wife 50 miles from the Mexican border. He's running. Why is he running? He stole $11.5 million from me. He returned home at the encouragement of his wife, would not talk to me. He shut down all my computer system. I couldn't get into my computer. I was desperate. I sent one of the employees of my company out in front of his house. He sat there for 12 hours waiting for somebody to come out because no one had answered the door. Finally, his wife walked out of the back gate. He immediately went over and said, I got to talk to this individual. He goes in the house. The individual runs into the bathroom, slams the door, would not talk to me. Therefore, I had to call my bank and say, look, my CFO has resigned. But don't worry. I know that I owe you guys $4 million. We're going through an audit. And the guy says, no, you don't owe us $4 million. You owe us $15 million. You're at the top of your credit line. I said, that's impossible. That's when I figured out I had $11.5 million of my money gone. Now let me tell you guys something. You talk about a tough battle. The bank immediately called my loan. They shut off all the credit. I had no way of paying my bills. The guy that was my banker became not my banker. They send you from the carpet floor to the linoleum floor. And they have absolutely, positively no mercy on you. No mercy at all. Well, I had to hire a temporary CFO because I was desperate. That CFO came to me under a contract basis. In April of 2001, about 8:30 at night, I was sitting in my office. I put my head down into my hands, and I was almost in tears because I saw absolutely no way out. The CFO walked into my office. He said, Jerry, are you okay? I said, no, Steve, I'm not. I don't think I can make this. I don't think I can make this happen. He didn't know me very well. But he said, you know, I guess I and the rest of the employees of your company have more faith in you than you do in yourself right now. He turned around and walked out. I sat there for a few moments, and I reached into my wallet, and I pulled out this little white card. I've carried this little white card with me since April the 23rd, 1966. And I read what's on this card. And I remember so vividly thinking, my life turned around when I pledged Sigma Nu. I can do this. I will not fail at turning my company back around. I picked up the phone. Again, by this time it's 9 o'clock at night. Called my banker, which was in the office, and I said to him frankly this: either get off my ass and let me run my company the way I've run it for the last 15 years, or tomorrow morning come out, I'll hand you the keys, and you can run it. That was the last I heard from that individual until about June the 17th, when I invited him to come out to my office. I paid all the money back, the $15 million that I owed him. He was so happy that he brought a new loan agreement out to me and said, oh, I want to be your banker. But trust me, he wasn't my banker after that day. That's another area there where I can tell you that I had to live my life as though I could not fail. Now, since that time, my wife and I have gone on to do things that we're extremely proud of. I will say to you that since last January, where we'd given a little over $9 million to Texas State University. We've now given over $12 million to Texas State University. And since that time in 2001, my wife and I have given away probably $25 million. So from that time in 1965 or 1964, that my life turned around because somebody asked me, do you want to be part of a group? My life has changed, and Sigma Nu is what did that for me. As I stand here today before you, I'm not saying this braggadociously. I'm only saying this to you because I have a deep feeling of commitment for what this fraternity has meant to me and what it continually means to me. And I would say to you, yes, I have a $9 million yacht that I just came from in Cabo St. Lucas. I have 2 houses in Mexico. I just finished building a new home in Wimberley, Texas. I have a very nice home in Houston, Texas. My wife and I have done around-the-world trips 20 times. I've been to every continent on Earth with the exception of Antarctica. I've been to over 75 countries, some of them more than 50 times. So yes, I have a great life. I have a life that I feel made a difference to me when I accepted the fact that I wanted to live my life as if I could not fail. Now I challenge each and every one of you who are sitting here today to examine where you are. Because leadership and being a leader is not saying yes all the time. It's saying no just as many times. It's saying no when some brother wants to haze somebody. It's saying no when somebody is not doing and following the code and the ethics of Sigma Nu. Now let me tell you guys, my wife and I have a chair at Texas State University for ethics. We have a chair there for accounting. We have 2 professorships at Texas State. We have a football stadium that's got our name on it. And that's all important to me, sure. But the most important thing to me in the world is to stand up here in front of you, knowing in my heart of hearts that everything I do and every decision that I make is the most ethical decision that I can possibly reach. Knowing as I stand here in front of you today that every day I live my life, I try to be a leader. I try to take somebody a little bit further than where they came. And with that, I would say I would challenge each and every one of you as you return back to your chapters to live your life as though you could not fail. Thank you very much. I appreciate being here with you.